Om Agnir Murta Chakshusi Chandra Suryo Vishaha Shrotri Vak Vivritasha Vedaha Vayu Prana Hridayam Vishvamasha Padbayam Prativihi Sarvabhutan Taratmam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Verily, that one eternal principle is the indwelling consciousness in all beings and all things. Fire is its head, the sun and moon its two eyes. The revelation of Scripture is its cosmic mind. Its arms and legs are the four directions. The universe is its heart. The wind is its breath. Music is its voice. And from its feet the earth has originated. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Yam Brahma Varnendra Rudra Marutaha Shtanvanti Devoishtavoi Vedai Sangapada Krama Upanishadoi Gyantiyam Samagaha Dhyana Vashtita Tadgatena Manasha Pashantiyam Yogino Yashantam Naviduhu Sura Suragana Devaya Tashmai Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Our eternal salutations to that one who is the truth of life and existence, and whom the sages call by various names. Our eternal salutations to that one whose glories are sung in the different scriptures of the various religious traditions of the world, but whose undying grandeur no mortal mind can comprehend. Our eternal salutations to that one upon whom the devotees meditate in the shrine of their heart, realizing an ineffable presence in their deepest contemplations. May he prompt our minds toward the path of truth and righteousness. May she reveal herself into our souls and dispel the gloom of death, fear, doubt, and darkness. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Satyena, Om Satyena Labhyastapassa Yesa Atma Samyagyanena Brahmacharyena Nityam Antaha Sharirehi Jyotirmayo Hi Shubraha Yam Pashanti Atayaha Kshinadoshaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The Atman, the indivisible self in all beings, is realized by knowledge, by moderation, by austerity, and by veracity, all these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it everywhere, existing in everything, even here in this very mind and body. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Welcome everyone to SRV Oregon. In our second weekend of classes, this particular weekend starts off on a double holy day. Today is doubly auspicious for Divine Mother of the Universe. It's Falaharini Kali Puja Day. Falaharini means the granter of the fruits of karma. So all those acts that people have done, particularly the meritorious ones, auspicious ones, are granted by her on this day. So you might want to think back on all your good acts and meditation and invoke the Divine Mother of the Universe today to bring forth all those fruits for the benefit of all mankind. It's also Shodashi Puja Day. It happens to fall on the same day. That's the day when Sri Ramakrishna placed Holy Mother, his young wife, on the altar and worshipped her as the living goddess. And that was a very auspicious day when she was just a pure young woman. Of course, when she was older, she was also pure. But he and she both went into a very high state of samadhi in that worship, as is recorded in beautiful testaments like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and the Great Master by Swami Shardananda. And realized in full the epitome of tantric Shiva and Shakti worship. That's more of the worship of deities, and then the Vedanta, which Swamiji brought here to us, is more of the comprehension of principles. Tattvas, they're called. And both of those go together very well. You'll find the tattvas form the grounds for beings to exist in, and then the deities are those beings that exist there. So you need to put them both together, both the grounds and the presence of God. And you'll find this living wisdom principle that they call Shakti, which we're worshipping today in this double holy day. We'll have a puja tonight on that and welcome a new member into our Sangha here in SRV. And we'll start the day off with a class on the Taittiriya Upanishad, as we looked at last week in 2 classes on Saturday and Sunday. Actually, Saturday was a class on Buddhism, wasn't it? Because Buddha's birthday was recently on the full moon. Born on a full moon, got his nirvana on a full moon, and passed away into Maha-nirvana on a full moon, so he's called the thrice blessed one. Speaking about auspicious days, he was attending upon all auspicious days in his very auspicious life. So that we worshipped him and his memory and his dharma, his teachings, on Saturday last. And then Sunday we looked into the Taittiriya Upanishad, and really we were, for many of us that have been studying here in SRV with myself as its spiritual director for some 22 years now, starting very early on here in Portland and in San Francisco, we found our way back full cycle to the teaching on the 5 sheaths, the Koshas. That is, man, that is yourself, man, woman, human being, possesses and has produced for themselves 5 coverings or layers or containers with which to sport here in the realm of name and form. One of them's the most subtle, of course, is ego. That's called the Anandamaya Kosha. And it develops out of a sense of separation from Brahman. It takes on a separate self. Lord Vashishta calls it the separate eye maker. So that's the first move towards duality, or towards two-ness, that happens as far as the human soul is concerned. We'll look at a chart later that shows how Shaivism, Tantric Shaivism, looks at the initial Shiva-Shakti separation from Paramashiva. But for now, think of it as developing this sheath of ego, and that's for self-enjoyment or expression of bliss, because Ananda means bliss, so it's the Anandamaya Kosha. So it takes a little bit of this immense ocean of bliss from Brahman and sequesters it out and enjoys it for itself. That's the ego element, ahamkara they call it in Sanskrit. Sort of like dipping a jar in a lake and then capping it off, and you put the jar back in the lake. You see there's water outside, a huge amount of it, and then some of that same water is inside. That's the ego. If you took a hammer or a rock and broke the jar underwater, then water would become one with water. And so the only thing that's separating us from ultimate reality is this sense of separation called ego, the separate eye maker. That's the first sheath, that the most subtle of all sheaths, that we create for ourselves in order to express ourselves, express some of that divine reality. Of course, if that divine reality is forgotten as you develop the sense of subtle self, then it can lead to samsara and suffering and rounds of birth and death and ignorance and all the problems that you see on earth and even in the heavens. So that first sheath, then you might say, needs for itself a chariot. It needs to get around, so it develops the intellect, the buddhi. It's called the vijnana maya kosha. It gets filled, again, if it's very refined and remembers its true nature, it gets filled with pure intelligence. So there's a difference between intellect and intelligence. Intellect is the container, and intelligence should infill it. In the case of a closed down mind, then it doesn't. Or in the case of a secular or a mind that's attached to lower knowledge, it puts its stamp on it. The ego puts its stamp on it, says, this is my knowledge, and my knowledge is better than your knowledge, and it's superior. And sort of like the glowworm that thinks it's brighter than the moon. But then the moon comes out and it finds out that its knowledge is very limited, and there's a much greater store of it somewhere else. In that way, the ego would have to turn back towards the ocean of Brahman and give up its hold on separate knowledge and separate bliss. All of these are grounds for problems later. If the embodiment process is not done clearly, then there's grounds for problems when it gets down to the fifth sheath, the body, which is very dense and doesn't hold light very well, a physical form. But we're still up there at the mind package. They call it the psychophysical being, or the body-mind mechanism, kind of. So we're there at the subtle body and the causal body. So ego and intellect are there as the first two sheaths. Now those two want to express themselves in terms of duality, and that's where they develop manas, or dual mind. Doubting manas, doubting Thomas. It's pretty much the same thing. The mind is there to split everything into twos: good, bad, pleasure, pain, life, death, virtue and vice. As we were talking yesterday, the householder's problem with making money, loss and gain. Another very basic problem in the world if it's not dealt with clearly, but also something to transcend, or to remain transcended of. So that manas is the third sheath, manomaya kosha. And with that triple package, now you've got pretty much the causal and subtle body of mankind, except for the addition of the fourth sheath, which is your energy, and that's called prana. When Christ said, man does not live by bread alone, he was talking about prana. It helps you raise your arm and helps you see and hear, and it's the life force in everything. Quite often people mistake it for God when they first get into spiritual life. Because the prana is capable of many tricks, as Sri Ramakrishna said, like, say, powers of levitation and those kinds of walking on water and all that. It's really a trick of prana. If you master the prana, you're capable of all sorts of amazing things. But the seers kind of warn you away from that. The life force has better uses for keeping the body healthy, mukhya prana, and for making connections to the mind, so that the mind wakes up. There's a kind of prana that distributes. There's a kind of prana that's all-pervasive. There's an upward moving prana. There's a downward moving prana. And these five pranas are another fivefold quintuplication package of this fivefold body-mind mechanism we're talking about right now, which I'm just giving you a verbal, off-the-cuff review of what we took last Sunday. In chapter 2, lessons 2 through 8, I believe. So we'll look at that again one more time, but I want to give you the introduction to it so you'll know that we're talking about the Adara system of Vedanta. Dara means holder, so these are things that hold your consciousness. We were talking yesterday about the missing element in the West, that is consciousness. And I think we even mentioned it last Sunday, is that if you're an observer, you can look at something and you forget that you're the observer, and you become identified with that which is observed. The seer forgets its seerness and it becomes identified with the seen, and you lose your objectivity. And subject-object relationship is going on, and the subject begins to become seduced out to the object and thinks itself to be a material principle, thinks itself to be matter, which is the case with materialists. And they forget their connection with the soul, or with the Atman we were just chanting. And that's, of course, a problem of great propensity to the seers and sages and saints. They don't want you to forget that connection, because that leads to suffering. And nobody likes to see anyone else suffer, nobody with any sensitivity. So to remove the suffering of the worlds, whether you're doing it in the Buddhist way or the Advaitic way or the yogic way or the tantric way, is going to entail that you have this connection between prana and mind well established. It's just like if you pinch the arm really tight here, it'll atrophy because it cuts off all the blood and all the energy through the nerves. The same way, if you have not allowed that prana to flow in these inner nerves, you have a whole set, hundreds and thousands, they say, of nadis, the yogis say. They're inner nerves that take you into dream and take you beyond the body at the time of death. And if you've opened those, you've opened yourself to the kingdoms of heaven within, as Christ was trying to explain to John. And if otherwise, if they're crimped, like stepping on a hose, then that prana is not flowing to your mind. Now, it may be flowing to your brain, but the brain is not the mind. If it's flowing to the brain, then you've got a great scientist or a great scholar, and a person who's got that ego stamp on his own particular brand of knowledge. So you like get some knowledge about some constellation in the sky and then put his name on it, or find out how to do some process with milk and put his name on it. So he's got this ego stamp on everything he does. And so that's a kind of a crimp to this wide open wisdom that's always flowing through the nadis, that the seers are and the yogis are in touch with all the time. They don't care about name and fame and putting their name on things and so forth, or about lots of money. They just want these channels open, inward channels. And so with lack of knowledge of consciousness as being a special element that infills the five sheaths, then you just become a body-mind mechanism, and that's all you are, a brain and body combination, and you live and die in that state, and probably you're born in that state again. But when you add consciousness into the quotient and you try to become conscious of consciousness, then these inner channels are already opening up, and you're having better dreams, your deep sleep is better, you're having a conscious death like Dalai Lama 14 times, has come back consciously as a bodhisattva. All of a sudden you have all these possibilities open up to you that you weren't aware of before. We often chant that, Te Dhyan Yoga Nugata Pashyan, Devatma Shaktim Sogunayar Nagudam, Yaha Karnani Nikilani Tani, Kalatma Yuktanya, Adidishtat Yekaha. Yeah, one of your favorites. That means the ancient seers of India, using the yoga of meditation, Te Dhyan Yoga, beheld the Devatma Shaktim, the divine power in everything, everywhere. And even though it was covered by its own modes of nature, like earth, air, fire, water, ether, touch, taste, smell, hearing, seeing, it was covered by its own modes of nature. Nevertheless, it was one and indivisible. And it had been incomprehensible to them earlier due to the limitation of their own intellects. So if the intellect opens up, the mind opens up, the prana is flowing, and you're feeding that with good food, not only at the physical level, but at the scriptural level, mental level, not just at the intellectual level, then you understand that there's a flow of intelligence that's filling the intellect. And just like the glowworm, you can look away from your own little light and turn around and see this vast light of Brahman that's supporting everything. It's called having a vision, or awakening the spiritual life, or seeing your Buddha nature, or having nirvikalpa samadhi or nirvana. That's well documented in hundreds of scriptures by thousands of saints and seers. Yet we shy away from it. Maybe in our culture we haven't been raised in the Dharma, so we don't know the possibilities that are there, or somebody has looked down on them and laughed at them, like physicists. They don't know anything about metaphysics. They should just stay to their physics. That's what they know best. But if they want to know about the kingdoms of heaven within, they're going to have to go to a person who travels inner kingdoms within. And one who knows all the chambers of my Father's mansion, as Christ did. And he'll know all levels of consciousness like that. So that's the import of this fourth sheath, the prana. It has to flow. When Vivekananda came to us, he said, two things are missing here in your ideology in the West. I mean, other than consciousness, which is most important, is prana and tanmatras. You don't know that there's a life force that's moving inward. You only take it and move out with it to the objects and pleasure. You don't go in with it towards bliss and wisdom. And the other thing is missing are the subtle elements. You don't know that there's earth, air, fire, water, and ether, but in your next, in the level of the ancestors and in your dream state tonight, you have 5 subtle senses called tanmatras and five subtle elements that operate there. And you've dropped the body and you've dropped your senses, but you've taken on these subtle senses and gone into a subtle realm, and you're actually operating there as an entity. It doesn't seem real to you, most of your dreams, because your silver cord is still connected back to earth and the body. But if you were to slough off the mortal coil, as they say, and run down the curtain and join the choir invisible, as they say in another way, then all of a sudden you wouldn't be so trapped to the earth. To have a silver cord down your spine that's hooked to the body and to 5 elements is rather like a calf that's tethered. It can move around only in a certain area, and it can eat all the grass in that area, you see. But it can't go outside of that, even though it sees greener pastures, as they say, you see. And that spike is holding it right there. And so all embodied beings feel that, from the highest to the lowest. If they get into meditation, they feel, I can't leave the body. It's natural to the embodied condition. It's primal. It's rooted there. And we'll talk about the curtain of nations maybe later in the class or tomorrow. That covers that the indivisible awareness of mankind, the Atman we call it, or Buddha nature. So to be tethered like that is very difficult. If you want to use another metaphor that came to me the other night when I was teaching in present, is that this formless Brahman covers itself with these 5 sheaths. You see, it covers itself with ego, that's most subtle, then intellect, then mind, then prana, life force, and then the body, the 5th sheath, which we are just now mentioning. So the body is the outermost, and that makes up the gross body. And then the pranamaya kosha, which is your life force, the manamaya kosha, which is your mind and thought complex, and the vijnanamaya kosha, which is your intellect, make up your subtle body. And the anandamaya kosha, which is your ego, makes up your causal body. It's the cause of all this. You want it to become separate and sport in a separate package, you see. And from all of that comes the 5 senses and the 5 elements. Spills right out as a natural. Millions and millions of souls have gotten into a form, and that's a lot of force in which they can project these worlds. God has no hand in it. He's not a creator, and not in my tradition. It's a transcendent reality. It's the mind and the awareness that's associated with it, conditioned awareness, the Buddhists call it, that is projecting all these realms of name and form. So imagine, if you will, like when I'm in Hawaii, I'm deep in the water, and I'm diving, and I see a manta ray, you see, a bunch of manta rays. And so one of them, you can even like maybe grab onto the wings. You're not supposed to. They catch you. If the underwater ocean police see you, they'll stop you from doing that. But anyway, you can follow this manta ray, and it goes down to the bottom of the ocean, and where you can't go, you have to hold your breath, and you see it, and it settles on the bottom, and then it starts to vibrate, and it kicks up silt, and the silt comes down and covers it, you see, and it's as if it's not there. That's what I was thinking Brahman is like. It's like this beautiful manta ray sporting in this wide open ocean of consciousness, and it covers itself with the silt of these 5 sheaths so that nobody can see it. Yet there's a whole ocean, wide ocean around of awareness, a whole field, a mind field, just waiting to be impregnated with vibration. thoughts. Thoughts of all kinds, errant thoughts, mixed thoughts, good thoughts, transcendent thoughts, devotional thoughts, wisdom thoughts. So that thou art. See? Hear that beautiful, huge manta ray floating in still crystal blue waters in the Hawaiian sun, you see. That's why I started off chanting Agnir Murta Chakshasi Chandra Surya. Surya is the sun. Agnir's fire. So fire is its head and sun and moon are its two eyes. You can just see consciousness is shining through all of these principles. Take it away and it's all dead and doesn't know itself and becomes materialistically oriented and so forth. So that's my 15-minute introduction to this class, which is a rather an extemporary review of what we studied last Sunday. And now I'd like to just read what we studied last Sunday to you. We're in chapter 2, and I might as well start with lesson 1. In fact, let's chant it together, because lesson 1 starts with 2 peace chants. If you look in Sarvananda's translation, 88, page 88, I have it, although my old version that I got from my friend Lex Hickson's library years ago is falling apart. So I don't know if they've made a new version of it or not. But if you hear this chant, you'll remember it. It's there are 2 of the peace chants. When you hear them, go ahead and chant it with me. We'll start it off traditionally, as if we were studying the Upanishad with a spiritual teacher. I don't know where that person is, but we're going to pretend. Om Sham no Mitraha, Sham Varunaha, Sham no Bhavatvaryama, Sham no Indra Brihaspatihi, Sham no Vishnu Rurakramaha, Namo Brahmane, Namaste Vayu, Twameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi, Twameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishami, Ritam Vadishami, Satcham Vadishami, Tan Mamavatu, Tad Vaktaram Avatu, Avatu Mam, Avatu Vaktaram, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And it goes right on. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvi Shabahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let me make English out of that really quickly. It's salutations to all human beings, salutations to the ancestors, salutations to the celestials, salutations to the demigods, salutations to the gods, salutations to the saints and seers and rishis and yogis, and salutations to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, God with form. Now, salutations to the formless Brahman. Thou art as real, what is true and what is beneficial. Therefore, protect us, protect our teachers, protect Guru, Dharma, and Sangha forevermore. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Peace Peace Peace. See, so those are 2 of the 7 peace chants which enfold the Upanishads, which are themselves found in the 4 Vedas, and you can see how they were thinking 5,000, 7,000, 8,000 years prior to the Christian era, and how they saluted all beings on all levels of existence. These are the inner worlds we're talking about. Now we have no idea of anything but the outer worlds. Only thing we can do is take care of the animals, insects, and plants. You see, but those came right out of our mind. But if we look into our subtle body, we're looking towards ancestors. We're looking towards celestials. We call them angels, maybe here. See, and looking on inwards to the mains and the suras, and then the gods and so forth. So there's a whole level of deities that are stacked inside of you. This is all yourself. You see, that they don't make any distinction between that and you. This has all come out of you. If you take you as the Atman and not as the ego. If you take you as the ego, then you're subservient to them. You have to bow and scrape to them. You have to pay obeisance to them and be obedient to them. But mankind can transcend all the gods. The Upanishads, Vedanta is very big on that. You can right now and here realize your true nature, your Buddha nature, if you want to put it in Lord Buddha's terms, and become teacher of the gods. All you need to do is realize your true self. That's what Maida was reading in the Gospel of Ramakrishna just before we turned the live stream audience on into this atmosphere, this classroom. That Sri Ramakrishna was saying that through devotion and fealty one reaches the inner realms, you see, and finally Brahman itself, which is innermost, or transcendent, or the perfection of the most perfect, the Siddha of the Siddha, he said. So with all of that as a sort of inner ideology, the West needs to borrow, you see, because the West has been based only in a faith tradition. It's never been given the wisdom traditions. India is big on the wisdom traditions. 7, 8 major religions? India's contributed 3 of them. Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. See? So India's huge import in the realm of spirituality. Its whole life has been given to spirituality. Even its physical life, in cases of dharmic families and so forth, is given entirely to God. And this is why, because the seers left behind these beautiful Upanishads. Probably hundreds and hundreds of them. There's only 108 left at this period of time, called the Kali Yuga today, the age of darkness. So we meet here to bring some light into the age of darkness. And when we bring some light into it, we're opening up nerves, just like you would open up nerves into your body and get a healthy body. You're opening up nerves into the mind that helps that prana flow and open up the mind, intellect, and then ripen the ego. So it won't get in the way next time we meditate and try and say hello to God. Try and have a relationship with divine being, with the divine being inside of you, whether it's with form or beyond form. Because remember, salutations to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Thou art what is real, what is beneficial, and what is true. And salutations to the formless Brahman. You know how we sing it, right? Because we sing it quite often. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurur Deva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Salutations to Brahma, the projector. Salutations to Vishnu, the sustainer. And salutations to Lord Shiva, the dissolver. Thou art what is real, what is true, and what is beneficial. And salutations to the formless Brahman beyond. You see. So, according to Sri Ramakrishna, divine reality exists both with form and beyond form. And beyond both form and formlessness as well. You don't stop there, or you don't stop anywhere. I used to call him a spiritual master, and he'd say, don't say that. 3 words prick my flesh. Teacher, father, and guru. Don't call me those things. Because if you call me a master, it presumes that I've reached the end of spiritual experience, and there is no end, I've found. It just goes on and on and on. So here is a man not just with an unripe ego, or just a ripe ego. He had no ego. Hard to find it. They used to ask him, who are you? And he said, I've been asking myself the same question. I look inside and I can't find any me. See? And it's gone completely. And that was really his great secret. And when, God loves humility, they say, so when the ego is gone, then God will infill. And wherever the ego is, it can't move in there. Just like that ocean water can't move into the jar that's capped off. See, it's shut. It's my knowledge. It's my ego. It's my mind. It's my body. I, me, and mine. Those are, I think he knew about 3 or 4 English words, and those were them. Is to say, I, me, and mine. That's not a good thing to say, you see. So he knew what the English mantra was. And then, of course, it really means name, form, time, space, and causation, Maya. So you have to observe that from a distance, as we say. So we've chanted these first 2 slokas. That is, Sham no Mitraha, Sham Varunaha, Sham no Bhavatvarama, Sham no Indra Brihaspati. Indra is the god of the gods. right into Sahana. May Brahman protect us, sustain us, and preserve us. That's the Trinity. And may Shiva also dissolve it all in the end. You see, and make it all as painless as possible so that we can realize our true nature. Easy to give up our ego. Easy to get out of the 5 sheaths. See. And in fact, there are slokas coming up which say exactly that. We'll get to them. Now, let me read you straight off, without any commentary, if I can possibly manage it, what we studied last week. This is, again, chapter 2, lesson 2, probably through about lesson, just part of lesson 1 through lesson 8. That one who realizes Brahman attains supreme. With reference to that fact, this has been declared. Brahman is existence. Intelligence, infinitude is Brahman. Who realizes Brahman treasured in the cave of the heart, in the highest ether, fulfills all wants together, since Brahman is omniscient. I feel commentaries coming on, so I'll have to move on quick. Suffice to say, Brahman is existence. That's what you need to know. From that very Atman, which is referred to as Brahman, ether came to be. From ether, air. From air, fire. From fire, water. From water, the earth. And from earth, herbs. From the herbs came food. And from food, the person came to existence. This Annamaya Kosha. This is indeed his head, this is his right wing, this is his left wing, this is his trunk, and this is the hind part forming the support and foundation. There is, besides it, this stanza of 14 lines explaining it. Lesson 2. Whatsoever creatures are contained by earth, truly all of them are born from food. Likewise, by food and by food alone they remain alive. Moreover, they return into food in the end. Surely food is the first and preeminent among all that is created. Hence it is regarded as the medicament of all. Those who contemplate food as Brahman really obtain all food. For food is the first among beings. Hence it is called a panacea. Living beings are born from food. Having been born, they are reared by food. Food is called annam, because creatures both consume it and are consumed by it. Verily, other than that one which consists of the essence of food and contained by it is this self-containing of vital energy. I'm talking about the second sheath now, which envelops the first, by which the Annamaya self is filled. Truly this one also is exactly of the form of a person, that one being in the shape of a person. This one also, accordingly, is the form of a person. Prana, indeed, is his head. Vyana, those are one of the 5 pranas, is his right wing. Apana is his left wing. Samana is his trunk. Udana is his support and foundation. Further, there is the following stanza about it. So the 5 pranas have now been mentioned that connect body with mind. Whatever gods or men or animals exist, all of them depend upon prana for their life. Truly, prana is the life duration of the animate world. On that ground is regarded as the universal life, sarvayusam. Those who contemplate prana as Brahman assuredly attain full span of life. For prana is the life of creatures and is therefore called the entire duration of life. The embodied self of the former one is verily this one too. It's sort of strange jargon, but if you just think of wood being thrown into fire, how fire takes on the shape of the wood, just like that, each of these sheaths take on the shape of the other when they're put into each other. They're the person. They're the 5-fold person. Sorry, I made a commentary there. Other than that self consisting of prana, there is within it another self consisting of manas, mind, by which the pranamaya self is filled. This one also is of the form of a person, according to the one's being in the shape of a person. Yajus is his head, Rik is his right wing, Sama is his left wing, and the injunctive part of the Vedas is his trunk. And the hymns of the Atharva Veda are his support and foundation. So the 4 Vedas are part of the mind sheath. With regard to this, there is the following stanza, lesson 4. That from which all speech recoils, along with mind, being unable to reach it, That one who knows the bliss of Brahman sheds fear completely for all time. And so it is. So they bring Brahman back in the middle of the description of the five sheaths here, to not forget the infiller, the pervader, the all-pervasive one that's there. The embodied self of the former is verily this one too. Different from that self which consists of mind, there is another inner self which consists of intelligence, by which the Manomaya kosha is filled. This one also is of the form of a person, according to one's other being in the shape of a person. Faith, Shraddha, is his head. Doing right is his right wing. Truth is his left wing. Yoga is his trunk. And Mahat, the great mind, is his support and foundation. That's your intelligence. The intellect, intelligence comes right out of the Mahat, the great mind. Your mind, hook it up with the collective mind with the cosmic mind, and sorry, I commented again. Lesson 5 of Chapter 2, which we also took last week. The agent possessing intelligence performs sacrifice and also accomplishes the various deeds. All gods worship intelligence as Brahman. It is the eldest. If one contemplates intelligence as Brahman and never grows heedless of it, one lays aside all sins in the body and attains all desires. This one verily is the embodied self of the former one. That is, the embodiment of the Manomaya kosha is the Vijnanamaya kosha. And it is by which the former is filled. This one also truly is in the form of a person, according to that one's being in the shape of a person. Love is his head, joy is his right wing, delight is his left wing, bliss is his trunk. And Brahman is his support and foundation. Vijnanamaya kosha has for its support the formless Brahman itself. On this there is also the following stanza. Lesson 6. If a person takes Brahman for an unreality, truly he becomes a non-entity. If he understands that Brahman is an existent entity, in consequence of that, the wise consider him right and good. That self embodied in that one, the Vijnanamaya self, is indeed this one called the Anandamaya self. Now they've reached the sheath of ego, subtlemost, the separate eye maker, the first appearance of division of consciousness into parts, eventually into billions of parts. Very few of them knowing that they're one with Brahman. And maybe not even many of them knowing that there's a prana flowing through them that they have to awaken to. Well, that's where we ended last time, and so we pick up our study. It touches on the Anandamaya kosha. I actually did a no-no and jumped ahead about the Anandamaya kosha. For some reason they put off its description until they get to this story. This is what bliss is. Let it be supposed there is a youth, a noble youth in the prime of age, most swift and alert, perfect, whole, resolute, most vigorous and of good learning, and that to him belongs the entire earth laden with all riches. Sounds like the perfect human being, right? Then we have in him one measure of human joy. 100 such units of this joy make up a single unit of which the realized human possesses. That is, a sage full of revelation and free from all cravings possesses 100 units of that joy that the young man possesses. 100 of this sage's units of joy possessed make the joy of a heavenly being. 100 units of the heavenly being make the joy of the mains. That's the demigods. They're below the gods, but they're very powerful. 100 times the mains joy, who live in the long enduring world, make up the world of the gods, who are so by birth in the ajana heaven. That's a higher heaven. So the gods are in a higher heaven than the demigods, and they have 100 times the joy of the demigods, who have 100 times the joy of the celestials, who have 100 times the joy of the angels, who have 100 times the joy of a realized sage on earth, who have 100 times the joy of the young, happy human being. Okay? It's 100 times 100 times 100 over and over, and they go on. 100 times such joys of the gods who have become gods by their deeds make up the joy of the higher gods. 100 such units of the joy of the highest gods make up the joy of Indra. And that's what we just chanted, right? Sham no mitraha, sham varunaha, sham no bhavat varyama, sham no indra brihaspatihi. And Brihaspati is next. 100 times of Indra's joy make up the joy of Brihaspati. So you've got a whole pantheon. You look at Hindu and say, oh, it's too exotic. I don't like that. You see, just give me one God or one savior or something. So you're like throwing away the whole cosmos inside of you. All the kingdoms of heaven which Christ himself talked about and told the apostles to meditate on in the Garden of Gethsemane. You're just casting it aside as if it's not yours, you see. You have to know this and make the connections, because if you want to come back into the body, you come through these realms. And right now we think of them as dream. It's our second state of awareness, is waking to dream. But in the dream consists all these lands. And as I said, if you separated yourself from the silver cord or the silver thread, this seems real to you now, you see. But if you lost your contact with the silver cord, then the dream would seem real to you, and this would seem like the dream. And that's what Ramana Maharshi said. This is dream number 1, and your dream tonight is dream number 2. They're both dreams. Now, if you go into deep sleep, that's formless. And in deep sleep is where all the seeds are for all of this. Lamp, pillow, rug, house, human being, body, all that. All the seeds for that are in your deep sleep. And that's why nothing ever dies in India. No such thing as birth and death. There's just, like the Buddhists call it, rising and falling, constantly all the time in cycles. The Hindus would say manifested nature, unmanifested nature, form and formlessness in cycles, forever. If you want to get off those cycles, then go talk to Lord Buddha. 550 years before Christ, he did it. He transcended his ancestors and got away from rebirth. And because of that, now we have Dalai Lama, for instance, and Karmapa and other great Tibetan Buddhists who are coming back through these lands every time they make their way into a body. Now, where we would call them lokas, they would call them bardos, so that each language, has its own way of describing this process, inward process and outward process. But what we don't have that they have in the West is involution. We have evolution. That's all we have. There's no return, you see. We're out here and we die out here. And it certainly is not the case ultimately, but relatively it's the case. If you believe in matter, then you become matter. Until you begin to awaken to the spirit within you, if thine eye becomes single and you know the truth, then you'll have openings to these inner bodies and to these inner worlds and these inner bardos and these inner states and this inner wisdom. And then pretty soon you can go beyond evolution and involution to your original nature, which is beyond both. The soul never comes and goes, in other words. It's the mind. It's the 5 sheaths that are doing all that, you see. Your consciousness, your ego consciousness putting on these 5 sheaths and appearing and disappearing and appearing and disappearing, just like you go into dream tonight and cast this body aside and take it on when you wake up. That's just a 24-hour period. But if you're talking about 90 years or 100 years or many lifetimes, it's just like an in-breath, a held breath, and an out-breath. Now I'm living, now I'm born, now I'm living, now I'm dying, you see. It's all in a process of 3 bodies, 3 letters to Om, 3 states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, 3 gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. You can just go on with Triputis forever, make the connections, but the important thing is to do that so that you have an inner life. When Christ came across the fisherman in the river, he said, "Oh, I see you have loaves and fishes and wives and huts, but you don't have an inner life, you see. Come with me, I'll teach you about inner life, and I'll make you fishers of men." And so Matthew and Peter and John and Luke and all these, they began to follow him. Some of them were fishermen, some were tax collectors. They were all under the press of the Roman thumb, you see. And the Romans didn't really care. what Jesus did. It was the Jews that were against him, his own people. See? So the whole thing is just very Mayic, you see. When a soul like Christ takes on the 5 sheaths, it's in consciousness and gives them up in consciousness. And he was on the cross, you see. Oh Lord, why have you forsaken me? Did he lose his faith in God when he said that? No, there was a hymnal in the songbook of the time in the temple that was named, Oh Lord, why have you forsaken me? Christ was singing that hymn on the cross to show everyone that he had not lost his faith, that he was not the body, that he was not the prana, that he was not the mind, that he was not the intellect, and he was not his ego. Now, if you worship Christ's ego, that can be a problem. But if you worship Christ's consciousness, no problem. You want to worship the light of consciousness. The problem with religion is that it looks for a savior. But Christ was not a savior. Christ was an exemplar. He came to show us the light. I am the way, I am the light. You see, follow me and you shall, those who love their life shall lose it. Those who hate their life shall get it again in eternity. See? If you love your father more than me, if you love your mother more than me, if you love your son and daughter more than me, then you're not worthy of me. Follow me first and bury your father later. See? Let the dead bury the dead, but you come with me and help us proclaim the kingdom of heaven. See? That's what he told his followers. So he wasn't attached to bodies and minds and egos, you see. It wasn't the point of it. It wasn't the point of existence. It was the aftermath of existence, the 5 sheaths. That's the mechanism by which you get down into the body. But you don't know the mechanism by which consciousness frees itself from the body yet? What's wrong with that picture, you see? You must be a master of evolution and involution. And if you're left without involution, then you're up a creek without a paddle, as they say, see. Now I didn't finish, you see. 100 times the joy of Indra is Brihaspati's joy. Brihaspati is the teacher of the gods. He even teaches the god of the gods. And 100 times Brihaspati's joy is Prajapati's joy. He's the primal firstborn. 100 such units of Prajapati's joy make the full bliss of Brahma. Not Brahman, Brahma. So now you get to Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Dev. Found your way back all the way to the Trinity. 100 times 100 times 100 times 100 exponentially is Lord Brahma's joy. And a sage who is full of revelation and free from all cravings possesses all these joys severally and progressively. And that bliss which is in the human being is also in the sun. They are the same. That is, what is there is also here. Sri Ramakrishna used to go into samadhi like this, you see. What is there is also here. So it's the same consciousness in everyone. Samadarshitvam. I don't believe in humility. I believe in sameness of all beings, that they have the same Atman, no matter what the outward characteristics might be, gender, race, so forth. As Vivekananda said that. I believe in the same Atman in everyone. See. Now, it also says here, those who know 100 times 100 times 100 teaching, they know, they are the knowers of day and night. They know that those hundreds and hundreds of measures of joy make up one day of Lord Brahma's life, and another similar make up one night of Lord Brahma's life. So you would say 480,000 times 2, take that number and give it times 4, take that number times 8, and take that number times 16, and you have one Mahayuga. It's much longer than the 4,320,000,000 year evolutionary cycle of the sciences. And it doesn't end in nothingness, like in a void. How do we know that? Because we saw the void, and we came back and named it. See? How would we know there was a void if someone didn't see it? And that nature abhors it, right? How do we know that we've had many lifetimes? Because we were there for our last death, and we'll be there for our next birth too. See, consciousness is birthless and deathless and all pervasive, so it doesn't come and go. Study your Advaitic axioms, your non-duality, because the West has not been given that. It's been given faith, it's been given fundamentalism, it's been given duality, dualism, but the non-duality it never got, you see. The only mention we have of it is I and my Father are one. And you hear that, if you're a Christian, you attribute it only to Jesus and not to yourself. But he wasn't there trying to make the 12 apostles follow him blindly. Be thee perfect as thy Father in heaven is perfect. He wanted to awaken them up to their true nature so they could become fishers of men, so enlightenment could spread. And he didn't want his religion based on origins. He wanted it based on this idea of constant eternity, you see, like a figure eight. Just even time and space cycling back on itself. And then the realization that it's all happening in me. It's not just happening out there, a billion suns. The billion suns are my thoughts. It's all inside me, and this came after this, you see. Didn't we just read that? From ether comes air, from air comes fire, from fire comes water, from water comes earth. It's all in a trickle-down process in sets of fives, and then it should return to its source through sets of fives. Quintuplication process, Pancha karana. Pancha means the fivefold cause of things. 5 pranas too, that are not included in the 25 cosmic principles. But there they are in the Upanishad, saying how to connect your body to your prana to your mind to your intellect to your ego, and then transcend your ego. So these are key teachings that the West needs to get. And so I jumped ahead again to give you that description of the Anandamaya Kosha, and it's 100 times 100 times 100 times 100 bliss. See? That's where your happiness comes from. That's where your contentment comes from. That's where your joy comes from, whether you know it or not. And you'll only reach it through a sattvic state. When your mind becomes balanced, then you contact your joy. As soon as your mind gets restless and lazy, it's gone. See? Like the manta ray is gone when it settles down under the silt. See? Still there, but covered. It's called the covering power of Maya, Avarana Shakti. Makes the indivisible reality disappear behind form and name and time and space and karma, cause and effect. Well, in terms of this lesson 6 of chapter 2, we have gone through the 5 sheaths. Now, here's the rendering that we had, which is like Vedanta 101. On the outside is the Annamaya Kosha made of food, then the Pranamaya Kosha made of energy, then the Manomaya Kosha of mind and thought, Vijnanamaya Kosha of intelligence, and the Anandamaya Kosha of separate bliss. And then inside's the Atman, and outside is Brahman. See, so there's the jar filled with the essential water, and here's the ocean out here, and these are defining or conditioning that indivisible reality to make it look like it's 2. Make it look like it's 5, in this case. Well, people don't even know about their life force. They know a little bit about their body and about their brain, but they don't know brain is different than mind, and they don't know the connecting prana between body and mind. They don't even know that the senses created the elements, that one spilled out of the other. So the yogis want you to meditate. If you go to a yogic teacher, he'll say, sit with me, do this with the children. Now connect earth to smell. Because, you needed something to smell, so you created the fragrant earth. Now connect water to taste. You wanted to taste liquids of all kinds, water particularly, and so you created liquid, you see. Of course, these are all connected to the mind, but you're tracing it by steps. See, because if you just jump from lowest step to the highest step, Sri Ramakrishna said, you'll never know what the steps in between consisted of. So you always have some doubt where, what it consists of, where I came from. That's why people are saying, where did all this come from? Why are we here? They're asking what, where, why, and when questions when they should be asking who questions. There are 5 W's, not just for. And who is the most important? Who am I? If you ask what, you're talking about objects. If you ask why, you're talking about cause and effect. If you ask when, you're talking about time. If you ask where, you're talking about space. And all of those are Maya, you see. But ask who am I? And then go to the source. So if you're meditating on connections, you take fire and you connect it here, right? Without fire, we wouldn't be seeing anything. And if you want to know what air is, connect it to the sense of touch. And if you want to know what sound is, connect it to ether. See, ether to sound. Vibrations go across the ether. Then, don't stop there, but find out that there are 5 different ethers inside of you. See? 5 different layers of space that lose their mass. Both the Buddhist scriptures and the Vedantic scriptures talk about loss of mass. Zen Buddhism is very big on it. That satori, that state you get into where you realize your busho, which we would call Atman, your Buddha nature, is without mass. So think about it. You go to dream tonight, you take on a subtle body. You don't have any mass, do you? There's no more up, down, sideways, width, breadth, depth, height. It's all like in one little tiny space, and it doesn't take up any space. So that's how space, ether, becomes subtler and subtler inward. We know how it becomes grosser and grosser outward, because we take a particle and we split it, and we find an atom and then a molecule, and release a great power for violence and so forth, and then subatomic particles are there. That's the outward of the outward, you see. But to go inward, you'll find intelligent particles, not atomic particles. Atomic particles will cease, and you'll begin to find atmic particles, see. Deeper and deeper you go. And that's where it's massless. And if you're doing this with a fully clarified set of 5 sheaths, you're sloughing them off one at a time, like a snake would slough off, say, five skins over time, then you find yourself back in your own true nature. Birthless, deathless, timeless, spaceless, and so forth. So, let's take a look at this teaching. Read this down really quick before we leave the teaching of the 5 sheaths on deeper levels. And this will not take any time at all because we've seen it. Let's involute. See, so it'll start at your outer sheath, your body. It is a transformation of food. It lives by food and dies without it. It is consisting of skin, bone, flesh, marrow. It cannot be the Atman or the soul because it changes. It is insentient, an object for the senses to enjoy. It is a non-enjoyer itself. It is material, undergoes change, borrows its life from somewhere else, has various attributes, and is controlled. It has a cause, and itself causes ignorance and identification with the unreal. That's Shankara's summation of your body mechanism. Summation of your life force. It has no knowledge, or let's start here, consists of the 5 organs of action and the 5 vital forces. Dwells in and permeates the sheath of food. It engages beings and works. If you want to know how to control your work, control your prana. See, you want to purify your prana, your work will get pure. If it's prana's erratic and nervous energy, then your work is rajasic. It moves like the wind, inside and out. So it is not immutable like the Atman. So it cannot be Brahman or reality because it moves all the time. It has no knowledge of itself. It is insentient and knows no difference between good and bad. You can use energy to kill someone, or you can use energy to, like Sri Ramakrishna said, man goes into a dark room and lights a candle and writes a scripture. Another man goes later into the dark room, lights a candle, and forges a check. See? So the prana doesn't have any sense of good and bad. It's just energy. So in that way it can't be counted on to be the highest. If you get to your mind sheath, it consists of the organs of feeling and mind. It infills the other two sheaths and thinks itself separate from other beings. It depends on the five senses for its knowledge. Big mistake. It retains its existence and interest via sense life, objects and desire. It is the very home of ignorance and the cause of bondage. It causes the universe to appear and disappear by its projecting power. That's crucial right there. God doesn't create. The mind projects and withdraws. Binds the soul to body and objects via attachment and frees it from them via non-attachment. So you're seeing that the mind has a doorway to hell or a gateway to heaven side to it, as Ramakrishna said again. Gets itself purified by resort to discrimination and detachment. So if it decides to go for spiritual life, it'll start separating the wheat from the chaff and get its act together. It deludes itself by creating objects, varieties, distinctions, qualities, and the belief in them. That's called Vaichitra in Tantra. It's one of the 16 evolutes of Maya. The belief in varieties, distractions. Janggang Khantu Rinpoche told me once when he was alive that the problem of this age, Babaji, is distraction. Too many distractions. Fine, I be single, know the truth, but it's all fragmented. It undergoes change, has a beginning and an end, suffers pain, and is not the seer. Something else sees it. So let's go to the fourth sheet. We're going inward toward the Atman, right? We're involving. The Vijnanamaya Kosha is the sheath of intelligence. It consists of intelligence, the organs of feeling, and the sense of I am the doer. It's interesting, Shankara says I am the doer really is in the intellectual sheath, not in the ego sheath. So, the ego might just think of itself as a separate I, but it needs the intellect again as a vehicle to actually think I am doing. See? So that's the distinction. It reflects consciousness, but is a transformation of nature. Since it is a form, it's a part of nature, unmanifested nature at this point. But it does reflect consciousness very well. And the whole teaching of Chidabhasa and Vedanta comes from that, reflected consciousness. That is, my teacher right up the street when he was alive here used to say, light reflects off a rock poorly, it reflects off a leaf better, it reflects off a lake better still, but it reflects off a mirror best of all. Because a lake can be rippled by thoughts. That's intellect is the lake, see. So it reflects consciousness very well, so it's the best view of God you can get is to purify the intellect. The ego is too involved with bliss, and it's seeking bliss only, and it's going to seek the bliss of Brahman. It's not going to think in terms of reflections and so forth. It works and says, I am the doer, I am the seer, I engage in works and I enjoy their fruits. It holds within it the three states of consciousness along with pleasure and pain. The three states of consciousness are waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. That is Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti in Sanskrit. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep. Given them names so that we can see their import. It is the upadi of the Atman. There it is right there. These are all upadis. They're called koshas. If you call them kosha, it means a container for consciousness. But if you call them upadis, it means a sheath or a covering. So it's the best covering for the Atman. It's the best container for the Atman, the intellect. It may be listed as less subtle than the ego, but nonetheless, it's by the seers. If it's purified, it can take you straight to Brahman, ego notwithstanding. In fact, by then, it realizes that the knowledge is not its own, it belongs somewhere else, so the ego sort of gives up right there. The chariot has got its own direction, and you have to go along with the ride. The Atman uses mind and intellect for its appearance. That's even more specific. Atman uses the intellect to manifest the mind and the appearance of Atman. In fact, there's a sixth sheath in one system called the Atma Maya Kosha. So somebody took it a little deeper. Let's look at the Anandamaya Kosha and finish that up. It is a reflection of bliss, but is reflected in the tamas of Maya. You'd have to know the system of the three gunas and what Maya is all about really to understand that statement. And we're not going to take it apart at length here. Just tamas is a slothfulness, inertia. It's the feeling of heaviness and weight. It can be in the mind, it can be in the body, but it'll also be in nature. Like a stone mountain, there's that feeling of tamas in Maya, see. So you can't take it personally there when he says that about the Anandamaya Kosha. It's bliss, but it's a bliss that's not revelatory. It's enjoyable. There's the difference. It appears and is felt only in favorable conditions and circumstances. That's very helpful to know for people who are into psychology of any kind. Is basically, it appears and is felt only in favorable conditions. So your Anandamaya Kosha, pretty much like that manta ray, just buries itself somewhere. And when conditions are right, it comes out and flies, you see, swims, glides through the water. Otherwise, if tamas and rajas are there, it tends to, that's not blissful, and runs away from pain, shuns pain, and seeks pleasure. It has a cause, for it requires good actions to be operative. It is not to be mistaken for the Atman, as it is dependent on something else. It is experienced in deep sleep, glimpsed in waking, and dreaming upon the fulfillment of desires. So the desires sort of veil the fact that you have happiness in you already, is kind of the meaning of it. You should be always living in your natural happiness, right? And you'll see that in the seers. They're just naturally light, but because they're aware of their ego in a different way than others are. In fact, people can say you're egotistic, but they don't know about the Anandamaya Kosha. See, and they don't know really, if you point to the ego, it's not just some bad quality you have in you, like arrogance, but it's actually a station which consciousness rests in, and which gets hidden and revealed. Has cosmological ramifications, as you see them here, that Shankar is talking about. So it's experienced in deep sleep. Well, that'll be important when we get to the curtain of Neshin's chart, as you'll see that that's really kind of a deep sleep state, and why you don't remember your true nature when you come back from deep sleep. You've glimpsed it, but you forget it when you come back to waking. If you can glimpse your Anandamaya Kosha there in the deep sleep state, then you'll bring some of that light back with you. And that's, the more you can do that, the more you can declare, I am the light of the worlds. So you come back with the whole store of it, like Christ did. It remains with the body always under the control of the gunas. So the gunas are going to have to be transcended, tamas, rajas, and sattva, before you can do away with this ego and transcend it. And that's the gunas at a very high level, a very deep level, not the gunas down here that we talk about in terms of the ordinary mind. So good to go through that once a year. We did it quick, but we did it in an involution type of style, and I can't see why there's any other reason why we can't go on, because we spent several hours now on the 5 shis as a review. It's Vedanta 101, really. So it's good some new people are here we're here to review it, because it's key to the Vedanta philosophy. You have 5 coverings over the Atman. We'll teach the children that by putting a little crystal inside of a box, wrapped in Easter egg stuff, wrapped in newspaper with the box, with the wrapping, tied some ribbon around it, you see. So the kids take off each of those 5 coverings and get to the crystal, right? And the whole teaching is not just to get a gift, but you've just involuted back to your true nature. You're the diamond nature inside. And all of these have been coverings that get sloughed off. And if you want to wrap it back up, go ahead. You see, take another birth, right? Take your crystal and wrap it up again with 5 more sheaths, and come here again with the 5 pranas, through the 5 ethers, take on the 5 senses, enjoy the 5 elements, see, enjoy the 5 kinds of stupefaction, whatever it is that you're coming here for. Or maybe do the 5 kinds of service of God and humanity. See? So there's all sorts of quintuplications here that are brought forth in that process. Now here it says, if a person takes Brahman for unreality, he becomes a non-entity. So if he understands that Brahman is an existent entity, in consequence of that, the wise will consider him right and good. So you'll be welcomed into the holy company, into the presence of Brahman. The self embodied in that one Vijnanamaya self is the one embodied in the Anandamaya self. So it reminds us of this chart, which is new. I don't know if anyone's seen it yet in Portland, but I created it over the last 2 months in accordance with some of these slokas in the Taittiriya Upanishad. And there you see 7 earmarks of God realization. It always reminds me of the verses about Sri Ram, that he says he's got all these auspicious markings. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Arnavavabhaya Darunam. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Arnavavabhaya Darunam. Nava Kancha Lochana Kancha Mukakara Kancha Pada Kandaranam. Shri Ram, Shri Ram, Shri Ram, Shri Ram, Shri Ram, Shri Ram. So one of the verses says, I have to tune this too. Bhajadina Bandhu Dinesha Danava Daichavam Sanishudanam. Bhajadina Bandhu Dinesha Danava Daichavam Sanishudanam. Raghunanda Nanda Kanda Koshala Chanda Dasa Rasa Nandanam. Shira Mukuta Kundala Tilaka Charu Udaru Anga Vibhushanam. Beautiful on and on verses like that about Sri Ram. He's the essence of bliss. He has all of these adorned with these sacred marks on his body. Forehead marks, and his arms are long, his cranial vault is wide, his eyes are spread apart, far not narrow. He's got all the auspicious markings of God in human form. So in that way, you could have a sort of spiritual physiognomy about a person like Ram or Krishna or Buddha or Christ or Muhammad, that they have these, they're born with these very auspicious markings. And those are physical, yes, but haven't we just been saying that from the subtle body, causal body comes the subtle body, and the subtle body comes the gross body? So if your consciousness has been enacting this process correctly, like say 14 conscious lifetimes of Dalai Lama and so forth, we refer to him because he's on the scene even in these days and has declared he's had that many conscious lifetimes. Although now the Red Chinese have driven him back into a disembodied state, he might not be coming back again. Whatever the case, this process of inward to out is carrying with it perfection, isn't it? It's carrying it with it earmarks. And these beings, you'd say it's not fair, right? They're born perfect, we're born so imperfect, you see. But God has nothing to do with it. They've clarified all the levels of their consciousness. They know the process. So when they come out from the Anandamaya Kosha to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, those two are filled with light. The Manomaya Kosha takes on that light. Then the prana takes on that vitality, and the body takes on that health. You see, it's just a matter of step-down process. And so this is why they're born in siddhas or siddhas of the siddhas. Either the perfect or the ever-perfect, either masters or past masters. They don't do any sadhana, spiritual disciplines in front of us unless it's to show us to do spiritual discipline. Like Sri Ramakrishna took a woman tantra teacher, he took a Muslim teacher, He took a Advaita Vedanta teacher in Totapuri. So, he'll take those teachers to show you should be taking those teachers. It was an avatar is far beyond perfect. He's the perfect of the perfect. And only comes here, as Sri Krishna says there, from age to age, to resurrect the old Dharma and destroy the new Dharma and destroy the old Dharma. I have nothing to gain here, Arjuna. I have no desires to fulfill. Why would I come into the form where anger, lust, grief, envy, jealousy, pride, delusion, pride of caste, pride of lineage, ignorance, attachment, aversion, clinging to life, the 9 antaryayas, and the 6 passions, and the 8 fetters, and the 5 kleshas. Why, when all of those are your playmates at recess, why are you coming into the body? You see, because if you take on an Anandamaya kosha, you can't be free of them. Lust is there the minute you take it on. It's lust for light. See? Lust for finer things. And it gets lust for grosser things, and you get attached to the grosser things. So, why take on a body, mind mechanism? They'll do it to show you the way. They're exemplars, not saviors. If you've fallen so low that you're patita pavana, it's in this song actually, patita pavana, it means the fallen and the lowly ones. He'll come for the fallen and the lowly ones because they have no other recourse. They have no other savior. Then God is a savior. But what he really wants is to be an exemplar and for you to follow the way. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that, my eyes have become red, blowing on the waning coals of your spiritual practice. See? So God can't even convince the human being that there's brilliance inside of it and drive it on towards realizing it. See? That's when God is helpless. That's when the ego is so thick, you see, that it wants nothing but the negative side of this whole chart, you see. So that's a predicament that's got no remedy. So therefore, the 5 sheaths need to be purified. There's of course, a sloka about that coming up. Which we will get to. In the meantime, we look at this chart with a couple minutes. We'll get into it before the break. We have a break in a couple minutes, but let's look at these 7 earmarks of God realization. Here's the quote about it from the scripture Jivan Mukti Viveka. The problem of non-perception of reality due to preoccupation with conventional duties can be solved according to attaining degrees of tranquility. And sort of like Tamas to Rajas to Sattva. So they're calling non-perception of reality a problem. And its cause is preoccupation with conventional duties. So in one sentence you've got just everything there, really. With this solution in view, the scriptures state, quote, sporting in the self, delighting in the self, yet performing works, such a one stands foremost among the knowers of Brahman. That's from the Mundaka Upanishad, which we've studied before. So you should take on these sheaths and sport in them, totally free of ignorance, doubt, fear, deception, and just express your divinity. That's what life is for. Not for anything else. Not for gaining wealth, not for having progeny, not for dominating over others and all the other things that people come here for. It's to express your divinity through these 5 sheaths. If you've taken them on, they're your responsibility. You train them, purify them, and express consciousness through them. So that's Jivan Mukti Viveka is a book on the shelf there. Swami, one of the Swamis of the order, I won't say any names, told me in an email about a month ago, don't let your students read that. You read it, but don't let them read it. It's not for householders. It talks all about giving up the world. And if you're not ready to give up the world, you probably aren't ready to hear that. So maybe that'll intrigue you to go get it on the shelf and read it. We Americans are so rebellious, right? He said not to read it. I better read it. It's just my psychological trick to get you to start reading the scripture and to look on that bookshelf. We were talking in a house meeting yesterday. Oh, the books need to be dusted every once in a while. Well, yeah, but they also need to be studied. You see, dust them off, but crack them. You see, crack them open and do it with a teacher if you can, because then you're going to get more out of it. So I think we've run out of time, but with that quote, that intriguing quote, we will take our break and we'll come back and study the 7 earmarks of an enlightened soul, which will be very intriguing for us. So thank you for your kind attentions. After our exploration of the 5 sheaths in depth for a second day, that is last Sunday and this Saturday, we have moved into a part of the Adara system teaching that has to do with more the consciousness side of it, of people who are operating their 5 sheaths in a perfectly healthy way. So not just how are you feeling today on the body level, but how's your energy, how's your mind today, how's your thought, how's your intelligence, and how's that ego? How about that damn ego, huh? So we look into those levels of our being and check in with them each day. It's a more thorough check than you would do if you were just physically oriented only and worried only about body and its health. So we were taking this up in conjunction with this sloka, and I wanted to read the one after it too, which pertains. If a person takes Brahman for an unreality, truly he becomes a non-entity. If he understands that Brahman is an existent entity, and consequence of that, the wise consider him right and good. That's lesson 6. And its second sloka. Now, therefore, the following question arises in respect to what has been taught. Does anyone who has not known Brahman attain it, after having departed from this world? Whether anyone who has known Brahman, departing from it here, attains it. So it's a 2-part question. So taking that up, the only way we can really answer that is to look at an illumined soul. My teacher used to start every one of his lectures, I salute Gaudapada because he was an illumined soul. So Shankara's teacher's teacher was Gaudapada, who wrote that beautiful commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad, which wowed both the Eastern and Western philosophical fields for centuries, and is still very impressive. Our own founder, Lex Hickson, actually did his dissertation in college at Columbia on the Gaudapada's commentary of the Mandukya Upanishad. So illumined souls like that, especially in this day and age, like Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, Ramana Maharshi, and Holy Mother, and people like that, really give us a strong proof and indication, proof if we needed, indication if we want to know deeper what enlightenment is, that there are people here who do attain Brahman, and there are many people here we know that don't attain Brahman, yet Brahman is still in them. The poison is in the snake, but the snake doesn't die because of that. So this, as Ramakrishna said, so there's this poison of relativity in it. Actually the 5 sheaths are exposed to it. And if they're unhealthy, it's like a cell wall, membrane is unhealthy, then things will get in and cancerous things will get in. Same with the cell walls of your other sheaths. You need to keep them very strong and resilient, impervious to insinuations that are unhealthy, and that's maintaining a state of salubriousness in context of 5 parts of your being. That's overall health, physical, mental, spiritual. That's what they call holism, but unfortunately the holism of this day is pretty much just around food and exercise. And if you can stay healthy doing that, then that's about all. But there is a health of energy, a health of thought, and a health of intellect and so forth. Even a health of the ego is very important so that you can live in society and be of benefit to others. That is very important to live Vedanta in your life. So we look at great beings like that to give us a representative, to be representatives of this state. So this chart here with Sri Ram as the center, who we just sang about, and his 4 arrows pointing to these different states of our being, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and Turiya. This Upanishad happens to also put in sleep into it as a kind of in-between dreaming and waking, that you fall back into a kind of sleep or dreamless sleep. And it also exhibits for us these 7 earmarks of God realization. If you want to put it in terms of Laghu Yoga Vishishta teaching, that is, Lord Vishishta said, with regard to the world, the yogi remains empty within and without, like a vacant pot left in an open space. a nice saying. But with regard to divine reality, he is full within and without, like a water-filled jar submerged in an ocean. So, world, empty. Brahman, full. There's a kind of a 4-part mantra for you. World, empty, Brahman, full. And if you want metaphors for it, there's the space in a jar, or there's a water-filled pot. Good way to think about it. That's how Lord Vasishtha would speak in terms of these 7 earmarks. But this is a teaching from the Jivan Mukti Viveka. Jivan Mukti is a living, liberated soul. Like Gaudapada and Shankara, as my teacher said, they were Jivan Muktas. And then Viveka means via discrimination between the real and the unreal. Through this path of neti and discrimination, separating the wheat from the chaff, so forth, they became illumined. They became Jivan Muktas. And can easily get into a Videha Mukta state if they want to. They can give up all bodies, all sheaths. And there's that sloka I keep promising to read for you that's coming up that talks about transcending the 5 sheaths completely. But right now we're kind of, studying them as we want to iron out all the kinks in them, make everything flow through them. So you see here, the first 3 earmarks are in the waking state. Goodwill, discrimination, and even-mindedness is how Jivan Mukta Viveka describes it. With a short definition, goodwill is the strong will to know reality with the help of scriptures and holy beings. The ordinary ego would not want that. It only wants its own authority, it wants its own knowledge, it wants its own superiority. But if you refine the Anandamaya Kosha, then you will humble yourself. Nahi ginena sajisham pavitram miha vidyate. You will get knowledge and get rid of ignorance. And prani patena sevaya prani paripasyena tadvidhi prani patena paripasyena sevaya upadekshanti te jnana jnaninas tattva darshinaha. You will get darshan by approaching the teacher, prostrating, being humble, and serving. And then that seer will initiate you into the highest wisdom. Will give you the ability to get darshan with your own self, as if you can't really see what's in the way of you're tripping over your ego, as it were. See? But he'll say, well, you need to do this and adjust that, remove that, and add this. See? And then all of a sudden you're whole again. You're able to operate on all 5 levels, sheaths, and in all 3 states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep efficiently. So goodwill here, we bring that up because it's not just the will of the ego, right? It's not even just altruism. Oh, I want the will to help people, because that's not humility. You can't help people. They can only help themselves. So you just have to skirt those little problems, serve God and human beings, not human beings, but God and human beings, and then pay everything forward to that higher principle of goodwill, which would be operable in the waking state. It's what you want to do to keep the 5 sheaths awake in the waking state, keep them clear. The second of those earmarks is discrimination. That's Viveka itself, differentiating between reality and non-reality and applying detachment. So they put Viveka Vairagya into one state in that condition. In fact, you probably know that song we often sing about it that has to do with Viveka and Vairagya, which goes so beautifully. Eşeçe nutan manus dek bijori hai chole. Eşeçe nutan manus dek bijori hai chole. Tar viveka vairagya juli. Viveka vairagya juli
dui khanda sada jule, tar viveka vairagya juli. Viveka vairagya juli, dui khande sada jule, esheche nutan manus dakvi joli hai jule.
Bengali song that one of Sri Ramakrishna's devotees wrote when he saw Sri Ramakrishna. It says, Tar Viveka Vairagya, Julie. It means basically there's a new man, Nutan Manus. There's a new man born. If you want to see him, come with me. And that's how they used to find Sri Ramakrishna through their friends. Like Rakal and Vivekananda were in high school together and they took each other to the master. And other of the apostles said, there's this strange man at the Kali temple. You should come see him with me. I saw him once. He's really amazing. So people would find out about Sri Ramakrishna like that. And it was pretty much unknown outside of Calcutta and parts of India in his life. And then afterwards, now 5 million or more followers in a short time. That's the way an avatar appears, very quietly working with a few and then all of a sudden expanding in an amazing way and in a very short time. So if you want to see him, come with me. Tar Viveka Vairagya Juli, he has with him only a shoulder bag. That's his only possession. And in the shoulder bag, if you open it, there's nothing in there except Viveka and Vairagya. Discrimination between the real and the unreal. And once that's accomplished, detachment from the unreal. Because there are people who sort of intuitively know that God is real and the world's unreal, but they can't yet detach from the world, from the unreal. So the earmarks of a being who has enlightenment is a person who has done this, has both Viveka Vairagya. So that's what it reminds me of here as we look at this teaching. Discrimination is one of the earmarks of a illumined soul. And that's in the waking state. Also applicable to the waking state is even-mindedness. Non-attachment to sense objects via the implementation of goodwill and discrimination. So you take the first two and you pay them forward into the Manomaya Kosha. You see kind of how it is. It's basically body and prana and so forth, your energy, using your energy and your life, to pay it forward or involute it back into the mind so that you have this even-mindedness. It can work both ways and should work both ways. You should be able to come up and down the amber stairs of birth and death. That's how Sri Aurobindo put it in his great epic poem, Savitri. Be able to come up and down the amber stairs of birth and death. That's what a yogi can do consciously. So, in that way, why do that? To implement goodwill to all beings and to show them that God is real and the world is unreal. If they think the world is unreal and they're suffering from it, then you can wean them off that. You see, well, these things aren't so important. They change. You can't get rid of anger because anger is going to be a part of the koshas. You see, so therefore attenuate it, rise off it, refine it, turn it. Be angry that you haven't realized God. See? That's how to use your anger. If you have lust after God. See, instead of after the things of the world. Do some sort of tantric sublimation to make that possible for yourself. Now, when you talk about the fourth earmark, you're talking about the dream state. And enlightenment applies there. Emptiness of mind, free of thoughts, and the ability to abide peacefully in formlessness. You see, you're talking about everything that starts with waking and you go deeper, then there's a period of dreamless sleep. And then there's a period of deep sleep. And there's dreams that are occurring sometimes in between those, sort of like a Dagwood sandwich. You see, little things coming out of nowhere. So you have to be versatile with the states of your awareness, so that you know when you're dreaming, you know when to awake, and you know when you're in deep sleep. If you have that kind of consciousness and that kind of facility, then your five sheaths are connected well with each other, and the prana is flowing between them, and the wisdom particles are getting into them, and all the things that we've been studying over the last 22 years, both with the scriptures and beyond the scriptures, into the open space beyond religion, then all of those are operating in perfect health, in a fine and fettle condition, as they say. So abiding peacefully in formlessness will happen as a sort of dream, sleep, deep sleep kind of segment. But it gets more pronounced in the fifth of these earmarks, sleep itself. Disconnection, the seer calls it. Freedom of mind and increased awareness, plus perception of the splendid reality, is how it's said. So there you're beginning to see something of a more abiding nature that is not found so much in waking and dreaming. As you can get caught between those two states of consciousness very easily. Most people are. They think waking is the only reality and dreaming is some sort of figment of their imagination. Then they might, maybe they're starting to do some, get healthier and work on themselves in whatever way you do that. Physically or psychologically and so forth, and then pretty soon you're clarifying your dream state and you're having more powerful dreams. You might even get some visions of some bearded guys in robes coming to you and telling you things that you, what did he say again? Yeah. Like that friend of mine who had a vision of a seer in a dream, here a hoary old bearded sage, told him 5 things. That's nice, actually, 5. And then he woke up and he told me about it. He said, but when I woke up, I forgot all of them. And the seer had told me that these are all important to your life, these 5 things. So about a couple of years later, I got a call from him. Remember that dream I told you about, the 5 things? Yeah. I had the first one today. First one happened to me. But I still can't remember the other 4. Mm-hmm. So these started happening to him. So if you were a soul that had ripped off those veils and coverings, you had all of enlightenment before you, then everything everyone told you in a dream, whether it was your deceased grandmother in an ancestor realm or whether it was a god in the realm of deities, would occur to you and you would remember it. And it would be profound to you and you'd know that it came from your own self, the self, at its different levels of inward awareness, and you'd have the courage of your conviction. You'd be assured of that, and nobody could tell you different. That would be your faith. And then you'd meet someone and say, "Come along with me. There's a new man I want to show you." You see, and he has a shoulder bag with discrimination and detachment in it. You have to learn that, and then you'd start to refine the process, and that's how it happens that you get. Enlightenment through lifetimes. Krishna says it in the Gita, Holy Mother said it in current times, and Ram said it even before Krishna. You get enlightenment of the mind, it dawns in stages. Yeah. The way Holy Mother put it was something like, let's say you're born in the body, and you do a little spiritual practice, and say a little japa of the mantra that you got from your guru, you make some progress. Then in the next lifetime you pick that up and you make a little more progress. And you have the merit credits, she said, from your past birth in your possession, and you can pay those forward to pave the way and give your spiritual life in that present life impetus, you see. And she said, by that way the soul makes evolution until it reaches Brahman, which would be dissolving all 5 sheaths. So that's an important 5th element. The 6th here, which is the penultimate one, is objectless delight. Sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? Because most of us get our delights in objects, whether they be our husbands, wives, and children's, or just material objects and the pleasures we get from them, or TVs, and nowadays our iPads and computers, and whatever else is beyond that now, which I'm not keeping up with. I just have this, and that's all I need right now. This and this will do it. So I put this into this, and then put it into this, and then give it to you. So deep sleep, called Sushupti, it's a very beautiful word in Sanskrit, because waking and dreaming are common to people, although probably their waking state isn't fully conscious yet, and their dreaming state is certainly not conscious yet. But deep sleep doesn't even occur to people. Not only occurred to Gaudapada, see, and Advaita Vedantists, and Zen Buddhists and people like that who know that there was a time when their consciousness went completely formless, and they don't like that, you see. I mean, they're going to like it, but they don't like it yet, because the veils of Maya, the curtain of nescience, fell over them, and they went blank, and they're not used to not seeing. Then I be single, you'll see everything. So what happened in deep sleep, that this curtain of nescience just came down, I got rest from it. I feel very blissful when I wake up. But when I wake up, I can't remember who I was or where I was in the deep sleep state. I can remember a few dreams, maybe. So when you illuminate the deep sleep state, which is the M of Om, A-U-M, then you're supposed to have these experiences of formless delight. See, your objectless delight. To see, you take away all of the objects that are here. And then Shankara tells his disciple says, well, I took all those away, but then there's nothing left. And Shankara said, perfect. Now meditate on that nothingness. So you're not acclimatized yet to live in the realm of no objects. So you have to get acclimatized, and you do that not by giving up because everything turned formless, but by actually meditating on the formlessness inside of yourself. And it mirrors, it mimics, or it is mimicked by deep sleep every night. You do that naturally, and you feel perfectly fine in deep sleep. But, you know, the Anandamaya Kosha and the curtain of nescience are still there, and they've gone into abeyance. All objects have gone into formlessness. Your ego's gone away. It's a perfect time in which to wake up. There's the least amount of impediments. But the impediments are very subtle. But they often say about deep sleep that the effects are gone, but the cause is still in you. What caused you to go into deep sleep and be forgetful? The effects of all that in dreaming and waking are gone, but the cause is still there to try and see through. So deep sleep state is pointed out by the seers, as we said here. So it says here, absence of external and internal influences and the irretrievable plunging of the mind into Brahman. It doesn't know that deep sleep, the light of deep sleep, is the outer shores of that ocean of light. See, it's just leaving the island, or the land. It's getting into just the periphery of the ocean. It hasn't yet taken on the whole ocean yet. See? So this is this state of deep sleep. And the deep sleep is just a natural segue into Brahman. But you have to take your consciousness with you. And beautiful songs about that are occurring to my mind right now. You have to take your consciousness with you. In fact, maybe I can sing it to you if it's readily available here. Yeah. It would be put in music sort of like this. Jatone hridaye ko adarini shamamake. Jatone hridaye ko adarini shamamake. Mantuida arami deki, mantuida arami deki, arjano deyu nahi deki, jatone hridaye reko, adarini shamamake. Beautiful in that rag, in that very Eastern mode that is so puts you in a deep mystical mood just to even hear, even if there were no words. But the lyrics say, "O blissful mind, awaken to this enchanting vision within you." It's the vision of Mother Shama, that's Kali, Divine Mother of the Universe. And when you perceive her form, which is enshrined internally in you, then open your inner eye of wisdom. See? And you'll find that sacred chamber of ecstatic love where she is. and behold her there in secret. Now she said, then he says, remember, if you abide there, if you go there, you cannot take the mind and senses with you. See? They can't enter there. So then he says in a kind of humorous way, but you can bring your tongue in there because you'll want to chant her names when you see her. See? So he's playing on words there. But the idea is the mind and senses will go into deep sleep. They'll go into Brahman. They'll go into formlessness. They'll go into emptiness. However you want to call it, in different ways it's been put. Even if it's a penultimate state, like Kaivalya, as compared to a seedless state, like a Sampragyata in yoga. You'll worship her there in solitude, and with all your self-knowledge intact, he says. And Kamalakanta, who wrote this song, says, now, since I've seen her, I'll always rejoice in her sacred presence. Once he's seen her, then another song he sings, no other form can I enjoy. See, when I saw Kali, I can't enjoy any other form. Her formless essence only attracts me. And radiant blackness is quite often how they explain that. Not just light, but radiant darkness. Like another song says, the yogis, in order to see Mother's shining brilliance, meditate in dark mountain caves. If they meditate out in the sun, they could see her. The sun might detract a little bit, you see, from that light. So they go into deep into dark mountain caves, see her, and she's just splendid there. She's so easily seen as light. And get that inner vision that is hardly granted to even yogis. Adept yogis hardly get her vision. So it's a very rare thing to see her inside of some of these beautiful songs, many of them from Bengal, of course, where you find Mother Kali worshipped so intensely, particularly by Sri Ramakrishna in this present age. So some reference to that, because I started thinking about objectless delight and how objects pale into significance, how the world goes away as you get closer to divine reality. And it's nothing to be afraid of, and it's nothing to argue about. It's just like deep sleep. You feel fine there. You still have desire for objects? Okay, you wake up, and then objects give you pain, and they give you pleasure. But then you go back into deep sleep, and you're happy there again. You're content. You're even-minded, you see. And enough in and out of this state, you'd think that people would awaken up to the fact that Brahman is beyond form. But if they don't, then they keep coming back and having experiences. That's their penchant, that's their delight, is delight with form. But he's talking about here the earmarks of God realization, which can't be compromised or belittled at all. They have to be held up in their main components of India's philosophy. Realization of the Atman within. Now, Turiya, that's the fourth state of your awareness. No, Om is like this, A, U, and M with a little tail on it. It's like a 3 with a tail. And then you see this little Shvara up there, it's called, which I call a one-eyed smile. You see, and it's like a half moon laying on its side, or a fragment of a moon laying on the side with a little dot there. And that's called the Shvara, or Turiya. It signifies what's beyond A, U, and M. And it's not connected. In fact, quite often we build a big Om sign out of dominoes in the middle of a big room with children, you see, and us big kids. And we build that big Om sign, and they can't wait to knock that down. You just tap that first domino, see. So when they do, the whole thing falls down, of course, and all the tail and everything. But the Shvara remains standing. So we asked them, what does that mean? See, what? Well, that didn't fall down over there. And they run to knock it down, you see. No, you can't do that. It's staying in one place. It's impermeable. It's immovable. It can't be knocked down. It's not connected to waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. See, it's Turiya. It's the ultimate state of states. State beyond states. The stateless state. It's like Jefferson State. Heard about that? Driving along the freeway now, there's a new state called Jefferson. But the sign goes by, oh, I guess we went through it. You see? Where is it? Nobody can find it. So Brahman is kind of like that. Kind of like Jefferson State. I'll have to look up and find out what they mean by that. But there is its transcendent definition. Non-perception of duality and varieties due to prolonged practice of the 6 previous states. So these are not all just to be graduated through and left behind. You're paying them forward, as I was saying several times, until the whole thing just accrues into Purnamadaha, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamadachite, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyat. So in that way you could look at the transcendent definition of Turiya to find out that everything is full there. So all of this gets paid just in order, as it were, sort of like this gets paid in order until you reach beyond the 5 sheaths into Brahman. And that is a quick rendering, maybe one of the first renderings we've had of the 7 earmarks of God realization. That's Vedanta 132. And there are 136 right now, so it's one of the newer ones. Let's move on to the third sloka of lesson 6, chapter 2. The Atman desired, may I become many. Let me procreate myself. It brooded on itself. Having brooded, it projected all this, whatever there is here. Having brought it forth, verily, it entered into it all. Having entered into it, it became both being and non-being. He became the defined and the undefined, the founded and the foundationless, the conscious and the unconscious, the real and the unreal. Whatever else there is, yea, Atman became the entire reality. For that reason, sages declare it and all of this as being real. Regarding this, there is this verse about it. So I was thinking that maybe we could segue to here in this regard and see what they mean. Probably Tantric Shaivism is one of the best ways in which we might be able to take account of everything that was just said in that sloka. So it entered into it all, right? It brooded on itself, as it were, and then it created the 5 sheaths, starting with ego mind, ego intelligence mind, and it started projecting itself into all those things. So it provided for them, then it injected itself into them. That was one of Sri Ramakrishna's favorite philosophical standpoints, is qualified non-dualism. It's the best place to teach from because you can't really teach from the non-dual standpoint. It's very difficult to speak about that, and when you're in it, you don't care to speak about it. You're enjoying too much of it, the beauty of it, the bliss of it. But from the qualified non-dual standpoint, that means all of this was created by ultimate reality, and then it entered into it as consciousness at different levels. Like the rock gets a little light, the leaf gets a little life, the lake gets a little more light, and the mirror gets more light. So depending on the station that it's entering, that much consciousness is allowed, or that much bliss. And then getting out of it 100 times bliss, 100 times bliss, 100 times bliss, it takes back on its original Ananda, all the way up to the Anandamaya Kosha and beyond. Right to the Atmamaya Kosha, as we were talking about. Well, how it trickles down, according to Shaivism, is from Paramashiva, or Parashakti, you call them. The two who are one, the divine reality in Tantra is called Paramashiva. Then the 4 Shaktis come forth, Icha, Jnana, Kriya, and sometimes there's 3 here, but sometimes another Shaivite system puts a 4th one in there called Drovya Shakti, the producer of substances, it's called. But Icha Shakti is will, and so we just talked about will, right? The very first thing, goodwill. And then Jnana Shakti is wisdom, Kriya Shakti is dynamism. So these 3 things come pouring forth out of Parashakti, or Paramashiva. And then you see from those, they create other levels. This level they're called spandas, vibrating spheres of consciousness. They're very, very elevated. Notice they're beyond the mind, elements, senses package. They're beyond the 24 cosmic principles. See, there's Purusha, And from Purusha on down, it's the usual rendering of Samkhya, right? But from this on up, they've added another 12 stations to make it the 36 principles of manifestation. So the Shaktis will then give rise to these things: Ishvara, Nada, and Shuddha Vidya, and Bindu and Sadakya. These are all tantric terms that you can read about and find out about from your teacher or from the scriptures, like the Fundamentals of Tantra is a good book to read, or Arthur Avalon's Serpent Power. There are some very good books written on Tantra that, if you've just been into Vedanta and yoga and you haven't really studied the Tantra scriptures, the 64 Tantras are called, and you might want to look at them. Now, Ishvara, of course, God with form. That's Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. That's the chosen ideal. That's the formless form. It's a very high station which you meditate on from here on up. Some people want to jump from the body right to Ishvara. See, but it would help if you knew some of these in-between stations that consciousness filters down through to get to you, your body. Then you can make those intrinsic connections and fire up the whole system. It'd sort of be like if you're somewhere in an electrical system and only some circuits are open, and you throw a switch and just one part of the city lights up, right? But if you made sure and you went along the connections and make sure they were all connected, and then you throw the switch and the whole thing lights up, that would be like becoming aware of your 5 sheaths, your 36 cosmic principles, everything within you filled with light. Light, light, leaping through the nerves. That's how Sri Aurobindo put it, again, in his epic poem Savitri. So Ishvara is a very high station along with the Shaktis there. And then you have Nada, Bindu, and Sadakya. We say the divine sound is there, Nada. That's where you might find Om. In the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. You see, it connects straight up to Paramashiva. So Nada is that divine sound, vibration out of which everything comes. You don't want to think that it's just a sound that your physical ear hears, but it's an inner humming of like 1,000 bumblebees inside of you. We went into a prison the other night. I was asked, what do you hear? Cells clinking, gates opening up, iron, talking, yelling, but underneath I heard Om. You see, behind the whole thing, a hum. Just like if you're visionary, you see behind all forms a light. But the yogis hear the sound behind everything. And then the mystics, the visionaries rather, they see the light behind everything. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, and he went to the wax museum, they took him, and he said, oh, that's just like my samadhi. I said, I see that all people and all beings are just wax figures, but there's a light in them. So, it's just like the wax museum. Insentient has been infilled by the sentient. But what's blocking it from getting to those stations is sort of what we mean. Even the body can be radiant, see, and live forever, as it were. So, and be very healthy. And if you meditate on prana, right, it said earlier, then you get the full span of life. So you have a full, healthy, conscious life in the body of 100 years. Bindu, that's an important point, of course, that you associate that with the third eye, the Bindu, and how everything comes out of that chakra and into these lower chakras. And it's another Kundalini system, it's another way of the trickle-down process. Mother Shakti getting into all these things. These are all called pure tattvas, and these are called mixed tattvas, and these are called impure tattvas. We've had that chart before in that teaching where when they say pure, impure, they don't mean moral and immoral. They just mean closer to Brahman or farther away from Brahman. The further things get away from Brahman, the more impure they are. And if they're in the middle, they're mixed. And if they're at a very high level, they're very close to Brahman, they're called pure. So it's not like an aspersion cast upon like dirt or filth or or degradation or anything. It's not meant in that teaching. Cosmic principles actually are insentient, so they can't really take on consciousness except at a high level. And that's kind of the point that we're following here. Brahman decided, let me procreate myself, brooded on itself. Having brooded, it projected all this. Having brought it forth, it entered into it. Having entered into it, it became being and beyond. And it became conscious and unconscious too, you see. It became everything that is. And it became the entire reality. Therefore, it's called real. All is called real. So this would be a very high revelation to have, which these Upanishadic seer is giving us. If we come down to the mixed tattvas, you have raga. You ever wondered what attracts things? You can study it on the level of physics and put a bunch of iron filings down and put a magnet there and they'll, you see. Or let's say how the soul gets attracted to God. Shyam Krishna used to say, if your soul, which means your mind, your five sheaths, if that's a nail or a needle and it's covered with rust, then it won't get attracted to the magnet. So you take salt solution and a little piece of abrasive paper and you polish the rust off the needle and immediately it'll attract to the magnet. The two will become one. So that salt solution is tears that you cry for God, he says. And then that'll take the rust away from your five koshas and you'll immediately have that sense of oneness again. Beautiful way in which the Master described these things. So raga is the power of attraction. It's the baby for the mother, it's the soul for God, it's the iron filings for the magnet. Raga is in everything. It's love, but it's love of a very attached kind. That attachment can be very refined, though, and very protective and very beneficial. And it can also be attachment of a very gross kind. Like Holy Mother said, that woman couldn't even give up her attachment for a dented tin pot. Thing is out of use, it's rusty, it's no good, and you still cling to it. Like that story in the Advaita about the female monkey, its baby has died, but yet it drags it around with it for months until it's just a smelly old corpse. So that kind of attachment is raga at a very, very gross level. So raga at a very, very high level, that's the soul attracted to divine reality. It wants to visit higher and higher realms inside itself. So it's taking that inner sojourn, that inner journey of spiritual life. Karya Maya, of course, is the Maya as the cause of things. Vidya is the highest knowledge. And then you have the time and its phases, and space and its soul. Remember how Maya is contained of name, form, time, space, and causation. Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. So you have these kinds of things coming out of Maya in a conjunction with their main causes. And there you'll have the mixed tattvas right in the middle. This is a filling in the gaps in the sloka. I mean, how you would explain the dynamics of a sloka. You could say, well, I understand Brahman has become everything. And it becomes so, by degrees. And the further out it goes, further away from the source it becomes, then it becomes denser and heavier, like the body. It's hard to get it up in the morning. Some people just have to sleep or can't get your attention going for class with Babaji. See? And you can't keep your eyes open. Pretty soon you're making a funny face at me. Let's see. As your eyes droop. And then you come up and tell me, oh no, I was meditating. That was samadhi. Wasn't a funny face. I was actually in samadhi by what you said. And I say, oh, good. Glad to know that. Well, at the end of the chain is Purusha, and that's where, according to Samkhya, everything starts. It's the soul that is in charge of all this. But the soul, between the soul and the Supreme Soul, Shaivism said, there are 12 other spandas, vibrating spheres, and we should explain those to people. Kashmiri Shaivism did a good turn with adding to Lord Kapula's system, which the father of yoga had used, which Vedanta had used. 24 cosmic principles were used by everyone. Buddhism used it. But Kashmiri Shaivism didn't just use it, it added those in-between subtle levels, which you could say are between dream and deep sleep and Turiya, you see. Those are things that you're not aware of in your deep sleep, or these finer and finer vibrations, these spandas they're called. It's a nice word in Sanskrit, spanda, a vibrating sphere, where consciousness is very concentrated. It's like your chakras, see. Consciousness is very concentrated in them. Consciousness is very concentrated in all 7 chakras, but its concentration is very dark in the lower centers, and it gets lighter and lighter as it rises. That means as it comes forth or goes in. And there you see the Purusha and its fourfold mind. Here really are the 4 of the 5 sheaths, right? And here's the 5th sheath. So if you want to connect this to the Ananda, all the koshas they're talking about, you can see that that's why Bhrigu approached his father, and his father gave him these teachings about the 5 sheaths. "Tell me about Brahman, sir," he said. And his father said, "I'll teach you about food." And as we're going to find out tomorrow as we go through this, he teaches him about food. He understands that Brahman's food. And then he comes back to his father and says, "Teach me about Brahman now that I've learned about food. I'll teach you about austerity." So he learns about austerity, he comes back the next day, "Now teach me about Brahman." So it goes on like that, and he takes him through all these levels. Sort of like the story of the 2 gods. The Lord of the gods and the Lord of the demigods, or asuras, they went to Prajapati, right? Whom we chanted about earlier, the firstborn. They wanted to find out about the Atman, because the Atman, if you have the Atman, you have everything, they heard. And they're being gods and demigods, they wanted everything. You see, the yogi wants nothing, you see, but the gods, they want everything, you see. So they went to the Prajapati and they said, "We heard the Atman is in the body. Tell me about that. I want to know it." And he told them, "Go put on your best clothes and come to me again." So they put on their best clothes, came back to him. Prajapati took him to the river and said, "Look at yourself in the reflection." They look, he says, "What do you see?" "I see us dressed in our finest clothes. Is that the Atman?" And Prajapati said, "Atman dwells in such as that." So the Asura, the Lord of the demigods, was satisfied. He went away to tell the other Asuras, and to this day people are attached to their bodies because of his teaching. They think the body is the Atman. But the head of the gods was more bright, so he started walking back to tell the other gods, spread the teachings. He said, "But wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because the body we know dies. Even the bodies of the gods reach an end and have to be reborn on earth." So he went back to Prajapati. He said, "Can you just teach me a little deeper about that?" So he started teaching about the prana, right? Pranamaya kosha. And then that happened 4 times. That God went away thinking prana was the Atman. Then he thought mind was the Atman. Then he thought intellect was the Atman. And finally he thought the ego was the Atman. And Prajapati was willing to let him go away thinking that, because he had to develop his intelligence. So finally he came back and got the teaching about the transcendence of the Atman beyond the 5 sheaths. Well, that's a very beautiful story that many of us have heard. In this Taittiriya Upanishad, you see it reenacted only in terms of Brahman is food, Brahman is austerity, Brahman is thought, Brahman is this and that. We'll get to that tomorrow, and look into that as some teachings. So all of this to say that consciousness is infilling everything. It's trickling down or manifesting out. And if the 5 sheaths are kept intact, then there's no problem with that. You can take them on, you can give them up. But that's not what's happening when the seer becomes identified with the seen, when the Atman becomes identified with the 5 koshas. That's not what's happening. The reverse is happening. Lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, pride, shame, fear. You see, all the suffering is happening. The misery is happening. Ignorance is happening. Doubt is happening. Fear is happening. So what's wrong with this picture, as they say, right? So go back, study your 5 sheaths, clarify them, and then predict your consciousness back through them. Aren't you doing that in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep every night? This time try and go to your dream state and your deep sleep and take these teachings with you. Take the light of these teachings with you. Take the Dharma. And if you still can't do it, saturate your mind in the Dharma. Try again. Make thine eye single until finally you'll see. You'll have the vision of reality. And you'll be absorbed in formless delight. And then they'll wonder why you don't covet things anymore. Second sloka of the Ishavasya Upanishad. Do not covet the wealth of other beings. Be a good teaching for American government. Well, now, before it creates more karma for itself. Like Dalai Lama wrote at 9/11, right? Oh, don't react, President, don't react. Send him a letter. Don't create more karma, kill innocent people. Just wait, hold back, and see, think about it. No. It was actually an excuse to go to war, we think. To covet over others, to get their resources. All they needed was just, that's how clever and calculating it is, you see. That has become, how thick the Maya has become, how unconnected the Koshas have become.
Didn't work out so well.
And it didn't work out so well anyway. We have to learn our lessons after the fact all the time instead of early on from the seers. Well, that goes in another direction. We want to stay with the Dharmic teachings. If the Purusha has its fourfold mind, which are 4 of the koshas right there, the Manamaya kosha, you could call that the, Chitta is thought, of course, and then the Vijnanamaya kosha and the Anandamaya kosha, all right there. You see how, the kind of interesting later if you want to look at this chart in the Tantric teachings, which ones connect to which ones, which ones give birth to other principles, the way Kashmiri Shaivism saw it. Well, Shaivism as a whole saw it. All the schools of Shaivism saw it this way, with a few different differences in the names. But you can see how, like, for instance, Vidya, which is knowledge, gave way to the intellect. So it has a nice, and how Karya Maya, which is the cause of everything, is fueled by thought, you see, or fuels thought. You have concepts, right? So you're relying on the cause of things, looking back to the cause of things, and those become your concepts for projecting further. So what the mind projects is overall is all of these 5s, sets of 5s. Basically, you can call it Pancha Gyanendriyas, Pancha Karmendriyas, Pancha Tanmatras, and Pancha Mahabhutas. Pancha means 5. So you've got 20 there of the original Samkhya Yoga tattvas, principles of wisdom, principles to study, to meditate on, and how they connect. So the Gyanendriyas are, of course, if you want the Sanskrit, Karna, Charma, Chakshu, Jiva, and Nasika. Basically it just means hearing, feeling, seeing, tasting, and tasting and smelling. I'm trying to do it in order. So from subtle to gross. And same with the Karmendriyas. You have Mukha, Hasta, Pada, Muladhara, and Jnanendriya. So that would be your locomotion and your excretion and all of these, they're called physical senses. Then you have the Pancha Tanmatras, Shabda, sound, Sparsha, touch, Rupa, form or color, Rasa, taste, and Gandha, smell. You can see that they've made a division between the organ of smelling and smelling itself, because the eye has a power by which it sees, and that deserts the eye in deep sleep, doesn't it? And in dreaming too, it deserts the 5 senses. They get bereft of their consciousness in sleep. The 5 senses get turned off. Sort of a clue for you to do it in meditation. Okay, you can do that in sleep real easy, but let's try and do that in meditation. Let's just shut off your 5 senses. Like Krishna says in the Gita, with all the doors of the all the 9 doors closed, the yogi gets into meditation. So if you count the apertures of the body, there are 9. So you shut down all those. It's a little bit more slimmed down version of Kapula's version of 24 cosmic principles. Then you have of course, Vyoma, ether, Marut, air, Agni, fire, Jala, water, Prithvi, earth. Those are the oldest names for the elements in any language. And they also have transformed a bit. You can say that there were gods for each of these. In fact, you chanted to them today. When we say Agni Murta Chakshusi Chandra Surya, you're chanting about Chakshush and Agni and so forth. You're chanting to the old gods of the senses and the elements, and invoking them. And when you do that, then you're asking for protection. Like the last slokas of chapter 1. This is, that was Taittiriya Upanishad in San Francisco 2 weeks ago. It says, don't destroy our heroes, O Rudra. Don't destroy our cows and horses and so forth. Keep us protected. Rudra is the powerful Shiva. That's the destructor Shiva. So you pray to him and you invoke him, wrathful deity style, in the old sense, to protect you. So you propitiate him. So you invoke him, and as a divine presence. There he is, right there. Sadakya is a form of Shiva. You see, so you have to be aware of these. No matter what word you might call them in different age, they are pretty much all around accepted principles inside of you. Nobody could deny, say, that wisdom isn't in people, that Maya isn't in people, that attraction isn't in people. You see. So these are actually stations of your own consciousness, in accordance with what we were just reading, right? That they've come trickling down out of Paramashiva, and Paramashiva brooded, as it were, and projected all this, and then got into it. And when it got into it, it became everything. This is also a good way that you could prove to yourself the Mahavakyas. See? That all this is Brahman, sayings like that. I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. These are how you could actually flesh those out in your understanding. See, by studying a system like the 36 cosmic principles in Shaivism. All right, so we went through that. And let's look at the next sloka, which is lesson 7. We have made it to lesson 7. We won't quite make it through chapter 2 today, but I bet you we will by the end of tomorrow's class. And now shifts gears a little bit towards that curtain of nescience type of teaching that's very subtle. He says, in the beginning this was indeed non-being. All was non-being, no form. From that verily being sprang. You want to know how? Study my cosmic principles. That of itself assumed a self. Assumption is the best word. It assumed the Koshas. Therefore, it is called the self-made or the well-made. All of this is well-made because it was, as it were, I'm not saying this literally, created by Brahman. It all came spilling forth from Atman. I mean, you can say that in terms of looking at it obversely by saying that if Atman wasn't there, all of this would not be here. But you can't say that Atman gave birth to all this either, because it's causeless. So something else had to be there in between Atman and the earth to project a cause. It's like your deep sleep state. That's where the cause of things are. And in terms of the koshas, the Anandamaya kosha is the cause, right, of the other 4 koshas. You can't blame it on Atman. See, if you're blaming things on God and devil, it's not going to work in Vedanta. You have to go to the High Court of Appeal, see. Try and convince the judge that everything is non-dual. This self truly is the flavor which is the essence of existence. Surely by grasping the flavor, this one, the individual soul, becomes blessed. Who indeed would breathe? Who would remain alive if this bliss were not in the ethers? They're appealing to us. Indeed, it is that and that alone that causes blessedness. The individual soul becomes fearless only when it obtains a firm and peaceful ground in the invisible, selfless, unutterable, supportless reality. Whenever it assumes the smallest interval in the state of identity, then it has fear. Very beautiful sloka here, really. If that oneness is realized and maintained, then there's no interruption in the bliss. 100 times, 100 times, 100, wherever you are in that, there's no interruption in it. But the minute it assumes the smallest interval in that state of identity with Brahman, fear creeps in. So that's why tomorrow we will want to look then at the curtain of nescience and its teachings on fear, doubt, and ignorance, of which it consists of. So we will move towards that. Finish the sloka. That is why even a wise man has fear when he is not reflective. There is this memorial verse regarding it, which would be lesson 8. Out of fear of him the wind blows. Through fear of him the sun rises. Through fear of him fire, Agni, and the god of gods, Indra, and Yama, death, as it were, commit their various functions. So that much we can suggest for tomorrow's class. I know you've sat through a lot today, so we'll quit a few minutes early so you can spend the day letting this absorb and sink in. See, shake yourself a little bit and let the silt settle down over Brahman, and then shake yourself again and fly. See. Shake off the 5 sheaths. Practice doing that not only in your meditation but in your deep sleep state. Come to know where you move, how your consciousness moves through these stations. For ultimately that will prove to you that it's motionless, that it's everywhere at once. All-pervasive being the word in English that's the best to describe that. So here, let's end with a chant and go on towards our Shodashi Falaharini Puja tonight, and on to class tomorrow on the Taittiriya Upanishad. Om Bhadram, Om Bhadram, Karnebihi Shriyamadevaha, Bhadram Pasyema Akshabir Yajatraha, Sthirairangayish Tushtuvam Sastanuvir, Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuho, Swasti na Indra Vreda Shravaha, Swasti na Pusha Vishvadevaha, Swasti na Starksho Arishtanemihi, Swasti no Brihaspatir Dadatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother of the Universe with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om